Let's look at the transformations that we have available to us in Illustrator. We can transform objects or groups of objects, and there are 5 different transformations. We can move objects, we can scale objects, which is to change their size, we can rotate objects, we can shear objects, which is to skew them, distort them horizontally, if you will. And we also have the option to reflect objects. And those 5 transformations can be accessed in several different ways. I'm going to select these objects with my selection tool to remind you that some of these transformations are actually available to us by simply using the selection tool. For example, move. This is the tool I use to move objects or groups of objects. The bounding box also allows me to rotate if I want to, or to scale. So these transformations are available to me, and actually even if I pull in the opposite direction with my bounding box, I can reflect. Now there's some distortion associated with that, and the reflect tool would do it without the distortion, but I can do it if I need to. So we have a number of our transformations available to us directly with this direct selection tool or the selection tool. The direct selection tool will allow us to move objects, whereas the selection tool will allow us to scale and rotate as well. All of our transforming tools allow us to make the transformation by clicking and dragging, as I've just done, or by accessing a dialog box. And there's several ways to do that. The easiest way is to make sure the tool is active, select an object, and press return on the keyboard. When that happens, we'll get a dialog box for that tool. And for example, if I wanted to move this dancer to the right 20 points, I could type in 20 points, and if I preview it, you can see that she moves to the right. I can say OK, and there it is. And again, to bring up that dialog box, all I did was, while the tool is active, I pressed return. Other ways I can get that dialog box are to double click on the tool itself, and the toolbox will bring it up. I also can go to the object menu, transform, and move. It'll bring it up. And now these ways of accessing the dialog box are the same for all of my transformation tools. So let's look at what some of our options are. So we saw how to move. That's pretty straightforward, clicking and dragging, or using a dialog box to get a specific amount of distance. So let's go to our rotate command, or tool I should say. Remember, we can rotate with the bounding box, but the rotate tool is going to give us a little bit more power, if you will. Whenever I select an object or a group of objects and then use one of my transforming tools, not the move tool, but the other transforming tools, I will see on the screen an origin, and that is the center of my selection. And by default, that will be the point that my transformation takes place from. Okay, and so if you see right now, it is rotating around that origin. Now, where is that origin based upon? And it is based upon the center of the bounding box of my object. So, you know, the center of the object may not actually be on it, because Illustrator sees the center of objects being the center of their bounding box as opposed to actual objects. So this origin can be moved. All I need to do is click somewhere else on the page, and I'm going to click on her toe right now, and then I'm going to click again with my mouse in a different position, and I can rotate now around that point. It does not have to be a position on the objects itself. Again, I can click way off of it and rotate again as well. So I can put that origin anywhere on my page, actually even off my artboard if I want to, anywhere within my workspace, and do my transformation relative to that. Now, a couple things to understand as we're working with these things. I'm going to move my origin up there for right now. And if I'm going to rotate this way where I click and drag, I have more control the further my mouse is from the origin. If I move it out here, I have much finer control. And if I click real close to it or keep it real close, I do not have such fine control. And because the sweep of the arc I'm making around it is much smaller. So if I pull this around, pull it out further, my mouse button is pressed the whole time as I'm working, and I can have much finer control the further my mouse is from the origin. Another thing I want to talk about when we're transforming is a really nice handy feature called transform again. Transform again will repeat my transformation. So for example, if I, and it would be any transformation, and so if I have my dancer here, and I drag her to the right, specific distance, whatever that may be, if I use my transform again command, object transform, transform again, or in this, the keyboard shortcut is Command D. Each time I press Command D, it will do that transformation. It's really handy. I'm going to Command Z. Let's go back. And even if I drew another object, okay, now what I'm going to do is select my dancer, but not the star, and I am going to move her a fixed amount. If I click on the star and use my transform again command, it will move it the same amount, any object. So it does not necessarily need to be applied to this original object that the transformation was applied to. So let's look at a way we can use that with the rotate tool. What I have here is I have a situation where I've created a circle and an ellipse, and I'm going to select this ellipse, and I am going to rotate it around the circle. Now we know that if I click at the center of the circle, I can put my origin there and I can rotate around it. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to do a little rotation and show you if I go Command D, it's going to move around it that equal amount. I'm going to go back to where we started and show you. I'm going to add something to it now. Whenever I drag something in Illustrator and I hold the Option key or the Alt key, I make a duplicate. So what I'm going to do now is when I make my rotation, I'm going to hold the Option key, the Alt key, and I am going to rotate, and then I'm going to press Command D. So since my initial transformation included a duplication, or what I refer to it as cloning, by option dragging, each of my additional transformations will also duplicate. All right, I'll show you that again. So I'm dragging. If I simply just drag to rotate, and my origin is here, so it's rotating around that center point. If I simply drag, I just rotate it or transform it, and no copy. If, on the other hand, I press Option as I do my transformation, I get a duplicate. If I press Command D after that, in addition to getting redoing the transformation, I duplicate. Now, as I did it all the way around, you'll notice we get to the end and there is not the same amount of spacing. So go Command Z. One of the great things about Illustrator is how easy it is to undo. Just hold down the Command Z key till you get back to where you started. And so what I want to do is I want to create equal spacing all the way around. Now we know that there's 360 degrees in a circle, so as long as I pick an angle that is a factor of 360 degrees, I will get equal spacing. To get equal spacing, I'm going to use my dialog box. My rotate tool is selected. If I press return, it'll bring up my dialog box. And I'm going to key in 12 degrees. I know 12 degrees is a factor of 360. Luckily, 360 has a lot of factors. And in this case, I'm going to click on the copy button, which makes a duplicate. But look what happens here. What happens is that an object, by default, rotates from the center of the selection. Right? That's what the default location of the origin. Now, even though I had moved the origin down here previously, as soon as I brought up that dialog box, it reset it to its default position. So I'm going to show you a trick here. If I want to move the origin and bring up the dialog box, I option click when I place the origin where I want it to be. So clicking places the origin, and option brings up the dialog box. And now I can key in the angle that I want, click on the copy button, which is equivalent to option dragging, and then I can just hold down the Command D keyboard shortcut till I get all repeats all the way around. In this case, what I'm going to do is bring that circle to the front, and you can see I quickly create a flower from two objects and a little basic math. And that very helpful transform again shortcut, Command D. Now let's go back to the dancer and let's look at Scale tool. The Scale tool is used to change the size of objects. Again, my origin is in the center of my bounding box. If I click and I drag closer to the origin, it's going to get smaller. If I drag away from the origin, my object is going to get larger. It's important to notice that when I'm dragging right now, I am dragging diagonally, and I'm also pressing Shift. Really, a default shortcut for Shift is to constrain in almost all graphic software, if not all graphic software. If I click and drag, for example, horizontally or vertically, I can distort the object. Or even if I press Shift, if I drag horizontally, I'm going to constrain to a horizontal scaling. So if I want to do proportional scaling, I need to drag diagonally and press Shift. Just like with the rotate tool, if I click further, I have my origin, and I click further away from it and drag, I get much more subtle, finer control than if I click right next to it and press Shift. You notice I didn't have to move very far to have the dancer really enlarge in size. Now, the reason for that is the amount of scaling I get is relative to where I start, where my origin is, and where I click, and then how much distance I change. So since I was really close, I don't have to drag far to double the distance between my origin and my original click, and therefore it scales real quick. If I click further away, now my small movement is just a really small percentage of the distance between the origin and my first click. Therefore, I get finer control. I hope that makes sense. Experiment with it, and I think you'll get a feel for it. Again, I can scale from any position on the page. by just clicking and moving the origin. If I want to scale a specific amount, I just need to press return, and I get a scale dialog box where I can scale as a percentage, and I can also scale non-uniform if I want to. I can choose to scale my strokes when I scale an object or not. I also can scale corners. So all these options are available to you. Quite often you might need to scale a specific percentage. Now, if you've worked in software like InDesign, and you place a graphic in and then scale it, you can go back and see in InDesign how much has been scaled. Illustrator is a little bit different. If I scale this dancer 200%, that is the new size of the dancer. Illustrator does not consider the dancer to be scaled at that point, 200%. So keep that in mind. There is no quick dialog box which reverts it back to that size. Command Z will do it, but if you quit and come back at another time and select something you've scaled, it will not show you how much it's been scaled. It will just show you its current dimensions, which is the way Illustrator treats it. Now, because Illustrator kind of bases the scaling on the bounding box and such, you can use this as a little handy trick as well. So I'm going to show you another trick similar to what I did with the rotate tool. And what I'm going to do here is I've got this column. It's rendered in with Illustrator's 3D tools, and I pulled in a line for my horizon. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the scale tool to help me quickly scale these in perspective. And so what I'm going to do is my object is selected. You can see that the origin is at the center of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my origin on my horizon to establish a vanishing point. So now there's my origin. I'm going to come over on this object. I'm going to click. I'm going to press Shift, and I'm going to drag. Shift constrains it, and I am dragging diagonally, so it's going to stay in proportional. And I'm going to drag it over to however far I want to move it. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to press the Option key. Now there's something I want you to notice. I'm not pressing the Option key right now, or the Alt key, but when I press it, notice my cursor changes to a double cursor. That lets me know that I'm duplicating as I'm doing this process. And anytime I'm working in Illustrator and I hold the Option or Alt key while I'm dragging, I'm going to make a duplicate. All right, so what I'm going to do now is release my mouse button and then the modifier keys, and you can see I duplicated it and it's scaled down. And while I'm scaling it in size, I am also scaling the distance to my vanishing point. That's the way it works within Illustrator. So if I hit Command D, you can see that each one, as it gets smaller, the distance also changes, and we get the proper distance as if we had calculated it out using more traditional methods. It's much quicker. If you've tried to have equally spaced columns using perspective and vanishing points and rulers and all that, you know that it's a little bit more work than doing this. So again, what I did is I moved my origin to where I want my vanishing point to be. I held down Option and Shift as I scaled down, and then Command D to repeat that. Close these files and get them out of the way. Back to the dancer. All right. The next transformation I want to talk about is reflect. All right. And if I go to reflect, I'll click on the rotate tool. I'm going to pull out to the tear off, and you can see that rotate and reflect are grouped together. And the reflect tool, well, it does exactly what it implies. It creates a mirror image of whatever is selected. So if I, my origin is still over here, if I double click on here, it will reset my origin and reflect across the center. With the reflect tool, I can reflect vertically, which is what it wants to do by default. So it chooses the vertical axis and reflects across it, or I can choose a horizontal axis or any other angle if I want to. So right now, my axis is reflecting across is running horizontally. For those Photoshop users of you, this can be a little confusing at first because Photoshop uses, instead of reflect, it uses flip. And so you flip something horizontally is equal to reflecting vertically in Illustrator. So they're using different terminology, which can be confusing if you don't do a lot of it. I'm going to cancel this, and I'm going to reflect. Let me move her over first, and I'm going to move the origin over to here. I'm going to click, I'm going to press shift, and I'm going to reflect there. And I'll hold down option so we can see what happens there. Now, excuse me, there's not a real fancy trick you can do by reflecting back and forth with transform again, because all it does is keep laying objects on top of each other. But you can see that we can reflect across any point and get a duplicate as we do that. And our fifth transformation is shear, and shear is nested in with the scale tool. And to shear something is to basically distort it, as I mentioned before, diagonally. It's probably, well, I should say from my experience, it is the least useful of the transforming tools. There are some uses. I don't use it very often though. So for example, I could shear her down. I move the origin by her toe and I can shear down. So let me show you a little trick with that. And what I'm going to do is go to my layers. I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I will lock the top layer right now to make it easier. I'm going to select everything on the lower layer, and I don't need a stroke, so I'm going to remove a stroke. And what I will do is I will give it everything a black fill on that layer. Is it applying? Let me see. Yes, it is. Everything on that layer has a black fill. Maybe I'll even make it, let's make it a gray. And what I'm going to do now is I'll bring the dancer back into view with my shear tool. I am going to click and I am going to pull her down this way. And you can see I can quickly make a shadow from existing objects by using the shear tool. There's another tool which allows us to do transformations. It's interesting. It's very similar to the bounding box. It's called the free transform tool. And on the face of it, it looks like it's just a bounding box. You can rotate. You can scale. But what you can also do is you can shear. And actually, if I am going to shear, I prefer to use the free transform tool because I can shear and scale at the same time. But what I can also do, and let me pull the dancer to the side, and I will draw a star here so we can see it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my free transform tool, and with this I can click and I can hold down the control key, excuse me, my bad, I can click and hold down the Command key. It'd be Control on Windows. And now what will happen here now, this allows me to distort the shape of my bounding box, which allows me to distort the object that's in it. So again, I click, hold down Command on the Mac or Control on a Windows machine, and my bounding box gets distorted and the object gets distorted within it. This can be used to distort type, for example. Now, I'm going to just, because I'm being so creative with my words, I am going to just use the word type. And now I have to do something to my type to allow me to do this. I'm going to my type menu and I'm going to create outlines, which what it does, it basically traces my type and converts it to paths. Now with this, with my free transform tool, I can click on one of the corners and I'm going to press Command so I can distort it. Okay. I am also going to press Shift to constrain my distortion, and with the free transform tool, if I press Option, it does it from the center, so whatever I do on one side is reflected on the opposite side. So when I put these together, I can now distort with perspective if I need to do something real quick. And then there's other ways to do this within Illustrator as well. This is just a really quick way to do it if you're not too picky. And again, with the free transform tool, the Command key will distort, allow you to grab a corner and change the shape of the bounding box and distort the inside. Shift key constrains, that's what it always does. And the Option key will transform from the center. And that is also true for the standard bounding box. Let me show you that in a way, hopefully it'll become clear. So with my bounding box, if I click up here and drag, you can see that the lower left corner is stationary, right? So I'm scaling, making my transformation relative to that. However, if I hold down the Option key, notice that as I drag the upper right corner, the lower left corner moves in the opposite direction, and that's with the Option key down. If I let go of it, the opposite corner stays stationary. So be aware of that. It can allow you to make quicker transformations if you want to. And that works, the Option key works both with the free transform tool and the selection tool. There might be a time where you have a whole lot of objects and you want to do some transformations to them. And the standard transformation tools just won't work. For example, let's say I want smaller stars. If I select all of these and go to my scale tool and I scale them, not only do the stars get smaller, but the area that they're encompassing also gets smaller. So if I really wanted to keep them spread out the way they were, but only make them smaller, I need to find a different way to do that. Same is true if I wanted to have each of them rotated. Let's say I want to rotate all the stars 5 degrees. If I go to my rotate tool and rotate them about 5 degrees, the whole group rotates. They're no longer aligned horizontally and vertically. So it can be problematic to do it this way. So there is a transforming command which allows us to take care of situations like this. So what I'm going to do is make sure all my objects are selected. I'm going to my object menu to transform, and I'm going to use the transform each command. So transform each will keep them in their same relative position but make the transformation. So let's say that I want my stars, I'm going to turn on my preview so you can see it. I want my stars to be 75% of what their current size is. 75, okay, and another 75. And what you see here is, my grid is still in the same place, but my stars have reduced in size. Again, I'm going to change the angle 5 degrees like I mentioned before. And now each star separately rotates 5 degrees as opposed to the whole selection. So this is a great way to go in and change things after the fact. Maybe you create a layout like this and realize you need to make a little tweak, but you don't really want to change the overall layout. Now, one thing that might seem odd is the move command, because if I move 2 inches, everything moves 2 inches together. That's the same thing as clicking and dragging and moving it over. Well, I guess that's a 1/4 of an inch, roughly. So, but you can get the idea. And I'm moving it, but that's nothing unique because they're all moving together. So why would this be here? Well, I think it comes in handy. I'm going to show you a nice feature of this dialog box, and that is randomness. All right, so we can add randomness in here. And so then when I start to put the move in, I get random movement. If you've ever worked in Illustrator and you try to get something like a group of stars or anything else laid out randomly, it's kind of hard to do because our brains, or at least most of our brains, are not that random and like order. And when we try to do it one piece at a time, we start to get a little bit of order. So you can start with order and then have Illustrator create the randomness for you. And you can see that the more that I change these sliders here, the more randomness I get. And so I'm really just kind of setting a range for the randomness to fall within. As I do this, I could even pull both of these, but everything is larger. So maybe I'll go a little bit smaller, and you can see now all the different possibilities that we can get within here. And it's really random. And I think that's really the main use of the move command in here, is to allow you some random movement between them so that you can get more of a random layout. If I click on OK, everything has been moved, scaled, rotated, and I have a new layout.